My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing.
But this is by Shake. Oops, that's a Y. By Shake My Spear. I breathe today, but live for then. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments, why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I'll stop, my body begging, bout to drop. And wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. Simple, straightforward, short, and beautiful in its own right. By Shake My Spear. I breathe today, but live for then, the friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments, why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I'll stop, my body begging, bout to drop. And wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. So, we are in an iambic form. Specifically, so I breathe today, but live for them. Da-dun, da-dun, but live for them. 8 syllables. The friends I'll never see again. It's 8. It's all 8. So we are in what is called iambic tetrameter or tetrameter. And most people have more so heard of iambic pentameter. And pentameter comes from penta 5, like pentagon. Tetrameter comes from tetra, which means 4. So, pentameter has 5 iambs, or is constructed of 5 iambs. Da-dun, 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 da-dun. Tetrameter is 4, which means 4 of these 2 syllables, 4 of these 2 syllable chunks, which means we have 8 syllables per line. So it goes unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, or an iamb, an iamb, an iamb, an iamb. Do that. Da-dun, 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 da-dun. I breathe today, but live for then, the friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments, why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I'll stop, my body begging bout to drop, and wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. And then we have a quatrain, 4 lines, and then maybe a quatrain with one little thing, but there is no line break, so it's just 4 and then 5 structurally. Iambic tetrameter and 4 lines, then 5 lines. The last line's the title. Thank you, Shake My Spear. That makes sense. So, is it still within the poem? Like, is this still a line of the poem, or is it also... Is it the title and the poem stops here? Or is it part of the poem and the title? Also, welcome in. Surprise, I'm reading your poem. It's both. Okay. Let me change the message in chat to reflect that correctly. How are you doing, Shake My Spear? Welcome. We are currently reading Without Our Friends There Is No Air, which kind of like bookends the whole thing if we have it at the start and the end. Without our friends? Okay. Without our friends, there is no air. Oh, and that's why it's all capitalized. That makes sense. Okay, so that's what we're actually reading right now. And I will unpin this one and pin this one. Excellent. Bring that back. And here we are. Let's do that. Okay. So, as we were saying, iambic tetrameter. 8 syllables, 4 iambs. Da-dun, 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 da-dun. And then, in terms of rhyme scheme, fairly straightforward. A, Y, goodbye, B, stop, drop, care, there, air. So, C, and then D. Just basically what's happening. Now, in terms of other sound throughout this poem, because there might be internal rhymes, for example, I breathe today, but live for then, the friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments, why? So, I know they'd say to say goodbye. So sonically we have this internal rhyme. Repeating, fleeting, we even have breathe and see, which gives this a lot of connection, a lot of momentum, which is really nice. I find, especially in verse, like having rhymes at the end of lines in verse definitely helps carry us through. It's very common. But internal rhymes really, I think, are a lot of the glue. So, I breathe today, but live for then, the friends I'll never see again, repeating fleeting moments, why I know they'd say to say goodbye. And then a simple repetition of sound, just say to say, which is very cute as a line. I like this a lot. And then we repeat, breathe and breathe. Breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging, bout to drop. And wonder why I even care, I look around, and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. Again, friends. Again and then. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging, bout to drop, and wonder why I even care, I look around, and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. So again, Okay, so now something different. Alliteration. Body, begging, bout, but, breathe. And then separately we have wonder why. And even without at the end. Raymondu, welcome. How are you doing today? And then alliteration at the start. I breathe today but live for then. So we sort of have this. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments why I know they'd say to say goodbye. And this is like technically alliterative. Same word, so of course it's going to alliterate. That seems like kind of the extent of what's happening here sonically, which it is a lot. There's a lot of this alliteration, this rhyme moving through, and it's very effective. I kind of like the shift. So the first stanza has more of these internal rhymes. The second stanza moves into using alliteration more frequently, even around and, although that's assonance. And that's cool. Cooler123, hello, welcome. How are you? I'm Ginny. We do poetry here. We're currently reading a sonnet called Without Our Friends There Is No Air by Shake My Spear, who submitted it in chat. The I at the begging and end to. Body begging about to drop. The I at the beginning and end. Just like the I breathe again, but then I stop. This and this. The top one, I goodbye. I see. And that goes into the why. Wait, I breathe and I know. And that too. Okay, so this is like, there's a lot of connection here. And I mean, there's just like a lot going on sonically, I would say. So many little details. I breathe today. We have say and today as well. So this first stanza, ton of rhyming, ton of repeated sounds in terms of vowels. And then in this stanza, I would say it's a little bit more alliterative. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging about to drop. And wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. You're doing all right. How about me? I am quite well. I always enjoy reading poetry and talking about this on stream. It is super fun for me, and I get to teach people and talk about stuff that I have some knowledge of. So generally I would say, as I see it, the pattern, the shift, is going from rhyme here to more alliterative sound. Maybe this happens to factor in to the meaning of the poem as we dig into that. Maybe it doesn't, but it's very useful to establish what's happening sound-wise, structurally, before thinking too hard about what the poem means. So to read it again, I breathe today, but live for then. The friends I'll never see again. There's another rhyme, actually. I breathe today, but live for then. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments why I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begging bout to drop, and wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. So, I breathe today, but live for the then. the friends I'll never see again. So, in terms of the opening here, I mean, meaning-wise, the friends I'll never see again. We've left, we have lost this connection, and are still trying to live in it, still trying to connect to that past of these people. Breathing, alive, getting by. Repeating fleeting moments. Why? So fleeting moments, things that are gone, that have passed, we now just relive them in our head. And the opening maybe asks why we would do this. I know they'd say to say goodbye. It's interesting because this line really speaks of like finality. I know they'd say to say goodbye. I know, I acknowledge, I understand that maybe there's some rationale in just leaving this behind. You know, bygones being bygones. And yet, obviously, whenever we say, like, I know that I should do this, it usually means that it's not happening in a poem. Cooler, I might need to pour myself a glass of wine or something. Sounds fine to me. That sounds quite lovely. Wine and Twitch poetry. So we open, then, this first half of the poem with leaving things behind and grasping toward the past. And move, I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begging about to drop. And wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging about to drop. So, breathless, out of air, no air, and the body is going to collapse. And wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. So, this line's fascinating, right? I wonder why I even care. Because this is sort of different from the body. This is like a physical reaction. Not having air, you die. And yet, we also have this subject switching to this mindset. You know, why do I even care? They don't care anymore. Which, of course, this can maybe be associated with death, in a sense, if someone gets to a fatal point of not caring. That could be what this speaks to. I look around and no one's there. It is... So we have this long dash. Wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. This sort of says that causally, no one being there is causing the subject not to care. And so they die, essentially. There's nothing to support them. Without our friends, there is no air. Air, the very thing that we survive on, in this case, that we breathe, that keeps us going and alive, that makes the body and the mind function. And so this person, like, grips on to the past. These people that kind of kept them alive, and unfortunately, it is upon that realization that they are truly gone that care flees as well. I never delved into poetry, but I'm amazed by the analysis you're doing right now. I appreciate it. I try to make it, like, break it down, demystify what's happening a little bit. And that's very important to me, that it be accessible even for people who aren't super poetic, even people who don't write that much at all. I've been thinking lately that poetry is a very accessible art form, and that there are a lot of people, particularly poets, who are kind of high strung and gatekeep this art form and aren't very helpful in bringing new people in. But in all honesty, like, so I said this like literally 2 days ago on stream, but it's, we all speak a language. Pretty much. Pretty much. There's like a few humans who do not speak language, who are like isolated or whatever. Like 85% of people can read. Most of these people have heard like music or like read a book or some kind of art that uses language. And that means all of these people have some understanding of poetry and like creative writing. But art is always hard to learn and hard to process. So having someone to, help bridge from like one's normal understanding of language towards like artistic language is, well, not a huge jump, but it's also something that we generally would hope someone would like guide us through if we don't know it. I think I later changed the second line to "my body begs about to drop" in my own document. That makes it clearer. My body my body begging about to drop. My body begs about to drop. And you think it makes it clear that it's a result of the previous line. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop. Versus I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begging about to drop. Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. So we can do this. So 2 versions of this line. Maybe we can look at how they function differently. So, I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begging about to drop. So your revised version, my body begs about to drop. No 2 G's in begs. Oops, too big. Begs about to drop. So regardless, like, I guess any change, we want to look at the whole thing and how it affects sound, meaning, structure. Is it supposed to say meaning? There's so many letters missing. Meaning and structure. So these are the important things, I think, in poetry. This is subject to change, but this is my understanding of it so far. So in terms of sound, I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging about to drop. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begs about to drop. I do think that about just first of all has some like sound advantages, some sonic advantage. About again, then doesn't matter here. About and again, you're sort of having this like assonant thing going on, which you're not achieving with begging and bout. So like, first of all, I just think it's better that way. And there is the fact that doing this connects these lines via sound. And anytime we connect something to another thing via one of these, it usually reflects onto the others. If I make a structural choice to put 2 things next to each other versus far apart, it is not only going to affect how you read them, but what they mean. Similarly, if I have 2 things that connect to each other in terms of sound, even just a little subtle assonant move there, it is going to, in some way, affect the meaning. potentially the structure, although this is usually like pretty evident on its own. So that's like good, because what you said is you think it makes it clear that it's a result of the previous line. So connecting these gives them some feeling of connection. Even before we talk about the difference of meaning between begging bout and begs about. So in terms of the actual meaning, I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging bout to drop. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begs about to drop. They do feel different in terms of meaning. I do agree with you here. I'm trying to decide why. And this is like very, very, very subtle, very nuanced. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging about to drop. So this is a gerund. This is a continuous verb. But like, my body begs. My body begging. Breathe again, but then I stop, my body begs. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begging bout. I don't know. I breathe again, but then I stop, my body begs about to drop. My body begging bout to drop. Shake my spear. Do you like feel that there's a reason why it makes it clearer? I mean, like, I think I agree, but it's so subtle grammatically that I can't quite suss out why. but I do think I agree with you. I'm not sure. Regardless, these lines are going to be connected. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop. It makes it clear that the body begs directly as a result of and after the cessation of breathing. Yeah, I mean, that's clear. Like, yes, that is true. It makes it clearer that the body... I'm asking why you think that happens. Like, I agree that it makes it feel more connected. The cessation of breathing into the begs. I'm just sort of trying to figure out for myself why. Because I guess it's not very helpful to us if we say, oh, this thing does a thing. It feels like it does a thing, right? But we don't really know the mechanics behind it. And if we don't know the mechanics, it's kind of hard to like replicate and teach. But I'm not exactly sure. I think with begging, it feels like the begging is concurrent with the stopping as opposed to subsequent to. Yeah, so begging is more continuous. So we talk about a gerund. This is grammar. A form that is derived from a verb that functions as a noun. No, that's wrong. That's not a gerund. It's like the... Dude, verb tenses are hard. It's called like the continuous tense or something. Purdue Owl. This website's great. It can teach you anything you want about English grammar. Simple past, present perfect. Taught, teach, perfect infinitives. Past perfect, future perfect. Where's working? Or anything ing. Begging. Why don't they have it? It's like probably it might be transitive. So this is why grammar is dumb. Verbs. No. Continuous tense. Okay, the continuous tense is verb be plus ing. I hate how these are all like... Okay. Let's try this. So, yeah. So it's the continuous tense, which means that it, like, I guess, like, it's associated with taking time, right? I mean, we even call it that, continuous. Continuous. And usually I think that means, like, for us, ongoing. If I say I am begging, then I haven't stopped begging. Because I still am. I am begging continuously. But my body begs is more of, like, I would say, immediate as an action. Where it's like my body begs, it does this thing, it does it once. It doesn't necessarily imply that it is still going to keep begging. See, even there, when I want to talk about what it will do, it will continue begging. Begging usually looks toward, like, the future. It's how we talk about. I will be running, or I will run. I will beg. But if I'm going to keep doing something, it's going to be keeps begging. That's, like, the only way to say it. So then this is probably more associated with the future. And which then maybe makes us, like, continue to look forward in the poem. Just that little bit of tense. Whereas begs is immediate and then just sort of looks to where we are. That's, like, super subtle. It is extremely valid, and I think it's, like, that shows a level of nuance in your writing, which is quite impressive. Because I think most people would be perfectly happy with the begging. Now, the bout also does feel out of place, and there is an aesthetic joy, I suppose, to body begging bout. But, in all honesty, sonically, if we're listening to this, which I think the sonnet is a very sound-based poem, it's a little song, then it doesn't quite matter if we don't get this nice visual BBB structurally, because I think the extra, like, assonance adds to the sound, and no sound is lost alliteratively, because these are just, like, separate syllables. My body begging about, or my body begs about to drop. We still have ba ba ba. My body begs about to drop. And since they're just, like, separated by syllables, it doesn't really change anything. The sound of the B repeating is nice. Oh, it is so fun to say. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop. So, Shake My Spear, should I from here on read this as my body begs about to drop? Since it is, like, a sort of change you've already made, and one that, I mean, I think absolutely helps this poem. Not that I'm going to tell you to change anything back that you've changed, but would you rather me read it as this? Read it how I prefer. I like this one more. And normally I try not to, like, change people's stuff because, well, you know, that's not what I'm here to do. Right, the meaning is basically the same, but I think we kind of established that there's a bunch of reasons why maybe option 2 is better than option 1. And they're subtle, but they're important. And when we have a poem that's very, very well put together like this, it is the subtle changes that are what we have to start focusing on. I think the revised version is slightly better. Yeah, and now you might have some reason to why it is better. This is really important to me as just basically an autodidactic person, someone who's taught myself poetry, someone who is hopefully pointing people toward how they might learn poetry on their own. I'm really just like a resource here. Is if we're trying to be autodidactic, which is self-teaching, or just learn in general, autodidactic. One of the biggest questions we can ask is why. So if I'm like working on my poem and I say, oh, this thing is good, oh, this thing is bad, oh, I'm going to do something else, and maybe this one's just like okay, and this one's good, and I'm just making changes and revising. But I'm not really questioning why any of these changes function as such. I'm not really going to learn. Yes, the iteration is going to help me improve. Iterating and saying, is it better or worse, is a pretty easy way to improve something, anything. But if we want to learn, essentially how to do that stuff the first time, it's about then asking, okay, this thing is a little better. Why is it a little better? And saying, oh, the verb tense that I use really matters in a slight and subtle way. And now there's maybe a sort of rule to it that begging, or the ing continuous tense in the mind, may have more of a signal toward the future. It may signal that. Whereas begs might signal the slightly more immediate thing. But that's also it's a level of nuance, which is really good to use. So, we were talking about meaning. I breathe again, but then I stop. I stop breathing. So, if friends are air, essentially, if there are no friends, there is no air, then we can sort of say that friends equal air. This is a great tool in poetry, is to say is to make approximations. Pi equals 3. If we're talking about engineers and math. If we just say pi equals 3, then it's a really easy shorthand. And similarly in poetry, if we say, oh, we're talking about friends and air as very similar, sometimes it's useful to just say that they are the same. So then when we say, I breathe again, but then I stop. Well, if I stop breathing and friends are the air that I breathe, then I have kind of made this decision to stop, engaging with friends in the same way that stopping breathing would be to stop engaging with air. And this is why it's an approximation. It's not perfect, but that's kind of what's being said. So then I stop, and then we stop. My body begs, about to drop. I wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. It's a simple enough meaning, right? Friends keep us alive. They support us. And even in a sense, I think, this stanza, the subject is still very much more alive and having air. They breathe again, or they breathe today. And that means they in some capacity have some air or some idea of friendship, even if the friends are in the past. I live for then. But this is keeping them going. Now, switching here, I breathe again, but then I stop. We've stopped that same kind of breathing. I know they'd say to say goodbye, so perhaps we have accepted this goodbye, this letting go of the past. But when the subject does this, when they stop breathing, it falls apart. Because then the semblance of friendship that they were holding on to is gone, and there's truly nothing. There is no air. And even if they're surviving on like a fraction of the air a person might normally, you can still get away with it. People climb like Mount Everest or whatever, and it's very tall, and you get up to like this level, and there is like no air. There's like, I don't know the percentage, but it's like super low. We can survive with less air, even being distant from those who are close to us. Mountain analogies really work in here. But if we have no air at all, if we truly separate ourselves, sever the connection, then you die. You just die. So it's good. That meaning, I think it's pretty consistent. That Everest analogy is pretty clever. Yeah, I got lucky. Sometimes you start an analogy and you're like, okay, wait, less air. Okay, maybe like a mountain works. And then you start to talk about it, and the analogy comes together. and then you have a very effective analogy. Sometimes you start an analogy and realize that it doesn't work so well, and then it all like falls apart. Because things start to contradict. But yeah, the mountain one worked really well. I'm gonna run a brief little ad break and then come back. So do take a break. Don't watch the ads. I'm not doing anything. You're not missing anything. Do some self-care, go to the bathroom, water, meds, and I'll be right back. Okay. Welcome back. I am still Ginny. Still the poet of Twitch. Still on 2/3 Lotus, twitch.tv/2/3 Lotus. And we are still reading Without Our Friends There Is No Air by Shake My Spear. So here it is. Without my friends there is no air. I breathe today, but live for then. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments, why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop and wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. I like this poem so much. It's so simple and straightforward and like heartfelt, I think, that I enjoy it a lot. And like the sound is so good. It just moves. I breathe today, but live for then. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments, why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop and wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. I think you can also do some fun things, performance-wise. Do the whole like last part in one breath, so you're running out of breath, and then take like a big breathe in or whatever. Yeah. So meaning then, yeah, it communicates very simply. I mean, it's like the title, Without Our Friends There Is No Air, and it just describes this in a beautiful, kind of simple way, and there's like nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I think there's a lot good about that because this says more than a lot of poems say in like 4 times the number of words. You had questions, or you had a question. You had a question. Do you feel that this poem strongly connects the theme of community? If not, how might I modify it so it does? Because if it relates to community and I like it enough, it gets published by me in a zine 2 months from now. And you get 25 smackaroos. So, does it relate to the theme of community? I mean, yes. I mean, the idea that like this is really how I think of community as something that keeps us alive. Not even community, but our communities. The people around us support us, do things with us, share time and space and laughter and sadness and grief and joy and all those things with us, right? And I do think, like, it is my personal opinion that the person who, like, you know, kills themselves does so entirely because of a, like, 100% lack of community, or in the case of, like, the poem, 0% air. And I do think it is, like, true to this degree, and it is that, like, starkly brutal. That is the reality of it. If people are entirely isolated, there's no reason to live. And so, to describe it as something so crucial as air, I think definitely, like, speaks to my understanding of how we relate to our communities and how people support each other and survive off of each other. So, does it relate to the theme? To me, absolutely yes. And there are definitely things that can relate on, like, varying degrees. You know, something can be slightly related to community, or it can be greatly related to community. Or communities is the theme. And that's just like, you know, I could have a completely, like, arbitrary poem that talks about nothing actually thematically related to community, but has, like, the word community center in it as, like, just something to describe something else poetically. And that is, like, very fractionally related to the theme. Or there can be a poem that has the idea running throughout as a constant through line. And I mean, like, this, I think, accomplishes that. Friendship is, like, our friends make up our communities. Our communities are where our friends often come from. Our circle of friends is a small community in of itself for any given person. So it does. Now, the second question is, that's the wrong one. Where did it go? It's over here. If not, how might I modify it in order that it does so? So we have to look at this, like, temper this question a little bit, right? Because the question asks, does it relate to community, or does it not? Very, like, binary. No community. And everything's gonna lie somewhere in between, like, absolutely not relating 0% to any given theme. Can do, like, red doesn't relate to our theme, and green, something can relate 100% to something. Now, having something like 100% encompass a theme is a very, very, very difficult task. I mean, this is like probably impossible. I think it's definitely possible for 0, but to 100% would mean every word in this poem drips with the theme of communities. And so we can ask, does it? Right? And that's really hard to evaluate. Very, very hard to evaluate. But I mean, it definitely lies somewhere, I think, in the green of being very related. And this is where I would want things in a publication with the theme of communities to come from. I maybe could argue a few of these and probably nothing over here into the orange and red. This is yellow, by the way. The colors don't show very well. But I mean, of course, if we're trying to write about a theme, we probably want it to be as far this way, approaching 100, asymptotic, as much as we can. So maybe I can still say how you might make this more related to communities. And I mean, there are like a few ways to do this. We look at communities, if we like define it, and it has many, many pieces. Because this can just be like the people we sort of like do things with. This can be like people who like share a hobby. This can be our direct friends. And this can be even just like family. This can be like religious. I mean, the theme is extremely broad, which means like a lot of different ideas can fit into here. This was very intentional. Religion, culture, in terms of just like practice, like regional, local practice and stuff. Identity, right? We talk about the queer community or the black community, where like, yeah, I'm part of the queer community, but it's not like I know every trans person or queer person. And so that's like interesting because there are people in my communities who are not my friends, not my family, not from my culture, who don't share hobbies with me, but are community because of shared identity. There are people who are in my family who share basically nothing with me, but are part of one of my like communities. There are people that I like sort of do hobbies with on a weekly basis and I see them at places, but we aren't really like maybe like that good of like friends outside of that, but they're still like someone in my life. So that makes this like sort of the encompassing of people who exist in your sphere. Now, so there are like two ways we could take this if we're writing a poem, right? We could write a poem that tries to encompass the feeling of community. Now, this only looks at maybe like one kind of community that any person has, which is their immediate friends, which is a super important one. They're one of the most supportive, if not the most supportive, if like the family one is gone, which is common for lots of people, unfortunately. So, it's not like you're taking some fringe definition of community, but this is also a fraction of the entire pie that makes up communities, right? And any given person, it's going to look different. Like maybe for someone, their community like breakdown is going to be like this much of their friends and then like their family plays a really small role, but then like their identity plays like a big role because it's like maybe they're an activist or something for like queer rights or something. And then, you know, maybe their uh, religion is very small as a factor, and then maybe there's a bunch of other like marginal stuff happening. But for some others, it could look entirely different. This is variable, basically. So, um, the question is like, would this poem be more related to the theme of communities if it spoke to more aspects of community than just friendship? That's a very hard question to answer, Shake My Spear, right? If you could expand this beyond friendship to more aspects of community and still have the poem effectively encompass it and describe it well and poetically and artistically, then yeah, probably. But also, will that poem stop being this poem? Will it become something different? After all, this is without our friends, there is no air. And are there better ways to describe the role of friendship in people's lives as a kind of whole? You do say without our friends. This is always an interesting thing in poetry. When we talk about we as poets, or our, or us, sometimes we play like a pretty dangerous game. Because for some people, friends might not be so much air to them as they are something else. Like maybe friends are like maybe for them air is their religion. And if they lost their religious community, they'd be down the mountain dead. And friends are maybe like some of the provisions that help them get up along the way. Maybe friends are like the warm hat that keeps them from like suffering in some ways, but it's just like a small thing of the entire climb. Oh, the mountain's working great. The mountain of community. um so then it's like is someone else's mountain the same as mine? And I know I'm just sort of throwing the question back at you, Shake My Spear, but I feel like that's kind of what I have to do, because I do acknowledge like this poem absolutely is about communities and falls into a range and honestly like a quality that it could absolutely go into the zine, given particularly given that there's like space for it, and I think there is. But at that point, like the thematic iteration of this is tricky. Making something like it's hard. Yeah, I think asking how to modify it was a bad question because it'd be a completely different poem. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily. Like maybe maybe there are certain word choices that give more of an impression of communities. In the same way that begging points toward the future and begs points toward the present, sometimes one word can point toward community more than another. Let me do this. So let's talk about food. Let's say I was trying to write about food and community, and I wrote meal. It's like a fairly straightforward, bland word. It is eating. Maybe eating together, but like not necessarily. Now, if we want to get religious community, literally communion is a meal that implies so much more of a kind of community. Um, we could talk about, maybe there's a specific word within a culture for a certain meal of the day that involves something, or like a holiday meal or whatever. That like religious meal, or no, cultural meal, right? That cultural meal would imply, using the actual word for it, would imply community more than just meal. Uh, you could even call it a gathering. Not even, like, maybe it moves away from the meaning of it being a meal, but maybe it's more important in a poem about communities for it to be this. So, so back to like the chart, maybe 100% is every word entirely exudes and drips with community. That's what I mean. Like, meal is not a very thematic word. Like, let's say, like, the word feast is entirely different. It's maybe more celebratory, goes toward a theme like that. It might be more opulent and wealthy. Feast is larger and more spectacular than meal. And thus, using feast in a poem about wealth might be better than meal. So, so we can look at the words maybe and say, how much does this relate to friendship or air? Maybe. Now, it gets really hard when you're writing in iamb, when you're writing in such like a strict structure, which you're doing so well, is like, oh, how can I fit a word, in this? Uh, like, first of all, there's so few words. um, but like, if we were to replace something like fleeting, we would want something that doesn't also detract from our poem in terms of sound, which means we would probably want something that still rhymes with repeating and see, or else our poem will get kind of worse in one way, where it's getting better in another. But like maybe a word like live. I breathe today, but live for then. Like living is certainly a powerful verb. Just being alive is a pretty incredible thing. But maybe there's a word for live that is more community than live. Live here doesn't do a ton sonically. It's just a one syllable verb. Maybe even then referring to the past. I don't know. I mean, you do a really cool thing sonically, though. I breathe today, but live for them. I breathe again, but then I stop. So this is actually like a very cool structural and sound inversion of what happens before. So like even this word that looks sort of innocuous and maybe less useful is contributing to the poem in a certain artistic sense. So it's like, how can I break this down and find the words that do a little less than the others and improve it just a little bit? And this is sort of the idea of like the diminishing returns. So we have a bunch of words. Maybe you can do this as like a bar graph. No, we can do it as the pie graph, actually. So we have a bunch of different things that contribute to our poem. Also, Dicus Magnificus, welcome. No need to apologize for coming into stream at this time. I'm not even going to call it late because it's like you're here at stream and that's awesome. So let's say we have our pie graph, pie chart, and like we have a word. Okay, so it's divided. We have like a bunch of different words in our poem, right? Here are the words in our poem. This poem happens to have 8 words. And each of these words in some way contributes to, let's say, this one contributes to the theme. This one maybe contributes very strongly to the sound of the poem, and maybe just a little bit to the meaning. Where like this word might be very important for the meaning of the poem, but do a little less in terms of sound or in terms of theme, and maybe like really nothing in terms of the other one. Whatever we said, the theme. So then, if I want to if I want to change this poem, particularly within the structure, where like, let's say this poem must be 8 words. Something restrictive like a haiku, or something restrictive, kind of like the form that you have created here. And making poems longer generally is bad, I think. So then, if I take this out, like, and replace it with a different word, I would want something that has a different, like, balance here somehow, that somehow accomplishes my meaning. But no matter how I change this, like, the quality of this word is going to get lost. Now, some words maybe are, like, kind of empty in a sense, where maybe this word is like 50% not doing anything because it's a boring word, and then like does the other things to some degree. So maybe there's a way that we can find 100% of the time words that 100% contribute to our goals. But this is sort of impractical, because we are bound by language, and language says things like subjects, objects, verbs, prepositions, but like we can't function without and, but, so, if, like whatever, these little words to that like don't do a lot. And these might not have a lot of meaning, but they definitely help our poem in terms of structure so that we can understand it. And I mean, they help in terms of meaning because the language has to work. So you're playing this game of balance. And as soon as you get, or like once you start to get into this region of like getting really close to capturing the theme, and let's say even doing really well in sound and structure, anytime you try to improve one thing, you run the risk of making another worse. And it's very, very difficult. But that's also why like this blind iteration stops working after a certain point, to tie in the other things we've talked about. And that's when you start to identify like, well, why does begs work better than begging? If I know this, then I can understand how those words are maybe fitting into my chart. If I don't, then I'm just pulling out pieces, putting in new ones, and it's going to look all weird. The ability of Jenny to turn any poem into a graph or math is unmatched. Yep. It doesn't stop. What do we have? We have like 3 charts on this, basically. Can't stop me, y'all. Yeah, but we can look at some words, and this is like maybe the advice to you. Say, I mean, it comes down to it at a certain point. When you have so few words, you also have the privilege of being able to do this if you're really trying to iterate and improve. What does Liv do in my poem as opposed to every other option that can fit within the spot Liv is taking right now? And it's like, at some point we do arrive at that level of detail. I think you would like Damaso, another wall of text. Damaso Alonso's books. He analyzes poems syllable by syllable Like when he analyzes one of Neruda's poems saying something like, mi lengua amiga blanda del dique del bouquet, making me say Spanish. My soft friendly tongue of the dike and the ship, making a phonological association between the words bouquet and dique, yes, ship and dike, affirming lengua y blanda, right, tongue and soft, with their implosives, ends, yep, of the syllables blan and len, and then the soft G and the other two. Okay, yeah, I would like this. This is awesome. Phonetic softness with the hardness of the K represented by the Q in bouquet and decay. Yep. Okay, I would like this. And like that's absolutely not for everyone. But like at a certain point, you have to depart from going by feel. Probably. You don't have to. But it can be worth it. This is sort of me saying in a not so veiled way that like this poem is very, very well put together. Sound, structure, meaning, the stuff pointing to each other. If anything, I think like sound in this poem is happening extremely strongly. And like there is part of me that reads this poem and feels like maybe I'm left with a little less impact than I would expect. I breathe today but live for them. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments. Why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I... Oh no, maybe this is just really good. But if there was more, like, what would I say this poem lacks? I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop. I wonder why I even care. I look around, and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. This might be a personal preference thing. Like we're stepping outside of sort of just like these maybe principles that I've come to that I use to look at poetry beyond myself. Personal preference. I don't like things very often that speak in like these absolutes. Without our friends, there is no air. This does not leave room for argument. You like state your case and say it is. It's not my preference, it's not the way I write to use things like without and like no one, like never. These are not words I enjoy in my writing or my language. I know I'm not big on certainty. This is my own opinion. And maybe something that left me more room as a reader to ponder the meaning and how it relates to me is something I would engage with more. And maybe that even relates to communities more because like letting your audience engage in their own way. But that's also preference. To be honest, I don't love the title Final Line, but I thought it was cute since it also scans and matches with the last rhyme. The title is the weakest part. I agree. So first of all, let's do something. What if we look at the poem without the title? What do we lose without this title? I breathe today but live for them, the friends I'll never see again, repeating fleeting moments. Why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop and wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. I mean, like, that is a very strong ending to a poem. It's visual. It's like final. I look around, there is no one. It is an end. And then, so you say you just lose the unambiguity. Yeah. So I personally am a fan of ambiguity. Uh, I like to let my poems live a little bit less, have a little more interpretations on the interpretation graph. And so you do also accomplish like a slightly nicer like structural thing going 4-4. Not that like the 4-5 is bad, but it is like a nice little symmetry. Maybe. Without our friends, there is no air. So sonically we lose again and friends as like a rhyme that connects this. But we sort of talked about how this isn't even a stanza that's trying to rhyme that hard. This stanza likes like the alliteration, and it does show maybe a change from this to this. Any change in sound is going to reflect a change in meaning. So just getting rid of like the friends, maybe even though it like takes out like an interesting rhyme phenomenon, might help in some way. Bizarrely. You lose the repetition of there and there, which like maybe sonically I don't enjoy. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. It's just like not a very exciting word. So yeah, you lose the clarity. You lose your reader knowing exactly the connection. That friends are air. The question is, can we make the connection friends are air without this? I breathe today but live for that. The friends I'll never see again. Repeating fleeting moments why. I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop. And wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. So you lose a lot of clarity. But I mean, so we have this motion from like saying goodbye to like stopping breathing, which I think does point us that like we've sort of left behind the friends and then we have no one is there. Like, I think it's implied enough. I don't know what the rest of chat thinks. There's also the eh sound, or the in again. Yeah. Then. Beg and awe in stop and body in the last quatrain. Also the E in breathe and even. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop. Wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Like, yeah, I don't know. Without our friends, there is no air. Just feels a little bit maybe tacked on. And maybe there's a title that could go at the top that would imply a subtler connection between those are unrelated to the last line. Yeah. Like it still has so much going on. And then maybe there's a title for the top of the poem that says something like this without saying this. You know, getting friend and air associated at the beginning of the poem, but like less obviously, and that's hard in a title. But it's not impossible. The good thing is Uh, if so, like this doesn't have to be the final version as, a thing for the anthology. And you don't even have to submit this again. Like resubmit with edits. I'm accepting like everything to the anthology knowing that it may be edited and that we may change titles and move things around and make them just a little bit, more to the taste of the poet. So yeah, there's like definitely some room to change some of this. And given that like, I mean, you agree that like the title is pretty weak, like you said that, I would encourage you to like work on it and really think. And honestly, you're bad at titles. Okay, so titles. We've had this discussion before. So there's part of me. So part of me really, really likes this as a title because, well, let's do this. Sound, meaning, structure. I can't escape this. It is yet to fail me. As a way to understand poems. I still like just completely don't write meaning. Meaning. Okay. Cool. So if we look at this and we say, well, how does the title relate to these things? Like, I really like your title because it has this, I mean, it's like iambic. It feels like part of the poem, which is cool. And you don't always see that in titles. Sometimes people just tack on a word and it can feel entirely like sound-wise just wrong. But like it's a really subtle thing and you want the sound though to be consistent and not like mesh with the poem. So this is one consideration for titles, is to have them sound like your poem and be consistent sonically with the poem. Structure, same. I don't think you're too worried about that here, but meaning. This is like probably the most important part of the title, is its impact on meaning. Because the title naturally has a lot of weight. People will and do focus on the title because the intent of the title is to relate to the whole poem or cast some light on the whole poem. It's the title of the work. Like, it is the thing that prefaces, sort of describes the entire work. So, how can we make a title? I mean, there are many ways we can describe the entire work. One can be to, okay, people do this a lot. They'll just like sort of do something thematically related, meaning related. Oh, this poem's about love. I'll call it love. I mean, this is probably about like the laziest version of that title, and I really hate titles that I don't hate titles. I find titles that are just a word like freedom entirely uninspiring, because it really just says like, here's the theme of my poem, which you can probably get from the poem anyway. So there is some sense that you want to add to the poem and have something that really like weaves into the fabric of poem. I could just throw my hands up and call it air. Right. And so like that maybe relates to like a symbol through the poem or a metaphor that you have going on. But again, like we know the poem is about air. And if we're trying to be artistic with our title and we wanted to add and not dilute our pie chart, then it should some way like point to everything and make it more complex and developed. Now, sometimes people do a thing where they take a title and make it like entirely different or seem very different, such that it maybe takes some work to relate what the title is saying to the poem and then kind of bring new light. Like, this is a way to do a title. Okay, you read the poem and you think, oh wow, this maybe means something. And then you revisit the title, which is maybe here. And then now that you can look at the title and look at the whole poem, it maybe sheds a light on the whole thing, which is different and new from what we had before. How this is done... I should probably spend a month just working on titling poems. Titles are hard. Like, you say you're bad at titles, like everyone, not everyone, like so many people are bad at titles. Like, I don't know. Some people are good at titles. Sometimes you don't want your title to do this, any of this. I was just thinking about Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver talks about very like simple, straightforward things, and this is the point of her poetry, to be like deeply simple and accessible. Moccasin Flowers is a poem about moccasin flowers. So Mary Oliver has sold more books than I ever will. So you can sort of take that as advice from her that you can just name your poem Air. Now this poem is called Some Questions You Might Ask. And it's a bunch of questions, but nowhere in the poem does it say that, I might ask them, I the reader. So Some Questions You Might Ask now takes all of these questions and gives it a context that relates back to me. And that's really good. Like, that's maybe a title doing this thing that is drawn on screen in a bunch of scribbles. But like this poem, Spring, okay, it does use the word spring. I was hoping it didn't. So that's like pretty much just using the thing. This poem is called Singapore, and it starts with in Singapore. Like, you do not have to do anything crazy with your work, with your title. The title is also an opportunity to do this. I also am not a huge fan of things that are untitled, but also personal preference, mostly because I I enjoy poetry as this system of connections, and not titling it, not creating another deep weaved in connection is a loss to me. But maybe no title is better than a title that does nothing. Does any title do nothing? These are really hard questions. These are like really genuine questions you would want to ask yourself as a poet. Like, what do I want my titles to do? You might have a different opinion on what titles should do. You might hear me talking about this and be like, no, that's not what a title is. There are a lot of things. Titles can just catch you off guard and hook you into a poem. Charles Bukowski does this to bring back the dead man who I'm in love with. He has a poem called like Swastika Star Buttoned to My Ass. There is no mention of really anything political swastika, Stars of David in the poem, but you read that title and say, oh man, I want to read this poem. uh, and in some way, the idea of like wearing this symbol on his ass kind of relates to the poem, but but also like, yeah, I just read that when I saw your video, lol. It's a great title. Yeah, it's a title that makes you say, what is this poem gonna be? So you could take that direction and do something entirely different. Um, I don't know what you would call it. um, like I don't know. You could title this poem as something related to like death and loss and running out of air and suffocating on the top of Mount Everest. Like this poem could be called Suffocating on the Top of Mount Everest. Or in like the, you know, whatever, like the stratosphere. It doesn't really matter. Um, and then that would like, and then you'd read it and be like, oh wait, that's kind of weird and interesting. It's about friendship. Or you could write like a title that's sort of pleasant and hooks the audience in with something beautiful. And then they say, wait, this is about like no one being with me and like the bad side of friendship. And that's cool too. Um, if this poem was about leaving friends, it could be called Out of Town because you moved away. Like, I mean, there's a million ways that this poem could be titled and add little difference and nuance, but it's like, I don't know. That's why it's so hard, maybe. But you have to say, what do you want to communicate with your reader? And then what title is going to do that? Non answers to hard questions. I should put that on a hat. That's what I do here. I give non answers to hard questions. I mean, they're not non answers, they're just broad and thematic. Do you have other questions, Shake My Spear, to tickle my brain? Or anyone else in chat about anything I've said, or this poem, or comments for Shake My Spear. Something like the air is rare up here. That's kind of cool. I don't know if I like air is rare, like that rhyme in the title, but maybe you like it. I think it like you yeah. Um but the idea of the title, the meaning is like there. I understand it. Um I have to think about titles. Yeah. Hopefully I've given you some like footing to think about titles. Uh it's really hard though. It's very, very hard. Not something I'm like proficient in yet, so give me at least a couple months. Then come back and say, Ginny, how do I title a poem? And maybe I'll have a better answer. I think someone has to submit me a poem with like an absolute like bombshell killer title where I will sit there for 2 hours and say like break down the entire poem through the title, and then I might understand them. Or use the classic, the first line is the title. Yeah, you could call it I Breathed Today. Which is like the classic because it works. I don't like it. The first line would be a decent title. I breathe today, but live for then. Yeah, it it might. It would definitely focus us. So here's the thing: If we title that the poem, that's like what we're saying encompasses the poem, which means the poem, probably in the eyes of some readers, becomes more about breathing today, even though we end the poem with being alone and not breathing. Is that what you want out of your poem? Do you want your poem to overall be about the breathing? Do you want the poem overall to be about the lack of air? Maybe that's your first decision. Is this a poem about lack of air? Is this a poem about air? Is this a poem about something in between that? Is this a poem about the loss of air? Loss of air could be the name of the poem. I don't know. Like, but that's the thing. Like, when I look at a title, I sometimes think, well, if it's the title of the poem, it's the title of the whole thing. And it can drastically warp the meaning of your poem. I breathed, past tense, would be like the converse to I breathe today, where that would point towards still breathing. I breathed, plural, would point toward like more the end, the lack of air. Breathing out, breathing in. How would these two things function differently as a title? Oh, now I'm talking about titles. Oh no, now I'm thinking, right? I mean, we can think about common expressions. So, I mean, what about deep breaths? What about shallow breaths? What kind of breathing are we talking about? I mean, you can use expressions like this as poems. That's a way to do it. But if we talk about breathing in, maybe that points toward the end of poem, like we're all out of breath and now it's time to start something new. Breathing out could be the gradual loss, and then maybe it's speaking to how we start alive and then get more dead the longer we live. Like, here's a terrific. No one cares. So, I don't know why, but sometimes I'll write a poem and I'll come up with a pun title like that, and I'll just be like, I have to. Like, sometimes they work so well that they are the best thing ever. And then sometimes you look at a poem and it's like, it absolutely cannot be that. And it's really funny how that happens. It's an intuition to it, maybe. Probably not. There's always a system. There's always a graph I can draw. But yeah. I mean, even like we can try titles. We can do random air related things. Let's say deep breaths. Well, what does deep breathing imply? There's some association with calming down, very fulfilling, meditative maybe, which, looking at this poem, maybe then that talks to a complex of mind where we're thinking about losing our friends and the people we've lost, and we just have to remember then that in ourselves we're okay, and if we take a deep breath, we'll be fine. Boom! That's a deeply poetic title with a cool interpretation. Is that what you want? I don't know. Shallow breathing, the opposite, represents this state of mind itself, perhaps, that we are sitting there breathing shallowly because we are not with people, and it's difficult, and it's hard, and it means we're dying or something. Like, those are entirely different. What else do we talk about with breathing? Breathe out, breathe in, we did that one. Air. I don't know. You could call the poem Airhead, and then it points to that the whole idea is dumb, and maybe you should just be happy instead of relying on your friends to be happy. That feels very cynical and very like capitalist, but it is a name. Air. But you see like how slight associations adding a little bit more than just air. is going to point your poem in like drastically different directions, which is why when I look at like air as a poem, I'm like, why did you not do more with it? The shallow breath title is good. It could be empty lungs or something. Yeah. It could be terminal bronchitis. I mean, who knows? You want to be topical, call it long COVID. Like, I don't know. Like, call it X thousand people hooked to ventilators. Now it's talking about the isolation of the pandemic on air. Oh, interesting. Certainly a title. On air. So referencing radio and broadcasting to others, which maybe makes sense in the sense of connection. If we're on air, we're trying to reach out, contact someone, and yet we are alone. Boom, that's an awesome title. Air conditioning. Well, that's maybe a double meaning. Air conditioning keeps us nice and cool. Also is association with like cold and like maybe just not caring. Boom, that's a poetic association. But we talk about air conditioning if we spell it out. And it's like, oh, maybe I'm conditioned in some way to need my friends. And like maybe you call it the Fresh Prince of Bel Air. A carbon dioxide poisoning. Plain, poignant, perfectly simple. Yeah. It could be, yeah. Carbon dioxide poisoning. Like that's a cool title. It is venturing like sound wise. It's very different from the sound of the poem. Not really lol, but it could be. It could be carbon dioxide poisoning. It takes this weird like difference between the scientific nature of it and then the actual feeling of it, and then it's like, wow, like it's describing this thing brutally and plainly, but then it's also showing us a very artistic emotional version of what it means to run out of air as opposed to what it scientifically is to run out of air. Like we could go on and on and on. um I don't know. That was really fun. It was like a title speed run of like, here's a random title. What? How could it relate to this poem? um. Yeah. Are we done with titles for now? Any other questions? Razor Monkey, hello. Deep breath. Yes. Could be deep breath. Any other questions on the poem though? Like, analysis is now at like hour 45. And I think like I feel for now I've said enough on this poem. But if there are more questions, I am happy to indulge your questions. Otherwise, I'll read it again. Also, any comments for Shake My Spear or me or whatever, like Shake My Spear. This is a really excellent poem. I enjoy the sound of it and how interconnected it is. Shake My Spear. I really like this poem. I've enjoyed watching this analysis in chat because I just think the meaning really resonates with me. I'm imitating hypothetical chatters for you. Shake My Spear. All right. I think we're done with this one, and you can go think about titles for a long, long time. Thank you. Thank you for submitting. It's excellent. So here is, I guess, as I still have it, without our friends there is no air. I breathe today but live for then, the friends I'll never see again, repeating fleeting moments. Why? I know they'd say to say goodbye. I breathe again, but then I stop. My body begs about to drop, and wonder why I even care. I look around and no one's there. Without our friends, there is no air. Without our friends, there is no air. By Shake My Spear. Keep snapping. Really, really enjoy it. Thank you for submitting. Thank you. And you're welcome, but thank you. Thank you, thank you. Really good work. Really cool poem. Thank you for the lovely analysis. Of course, it is my pleasure to do so. It's fun. You'll probably see at the end how much fun I was having and throughout. Like, I love this shit. Y'all are amazing.
Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.